So, okay, I think we have quite a bit of people in here now. So welcome everyone. This is our virtual campfire series on two-eyed seeing in conservation practice. And I want to introduce you to Elder Albert Marshall. And I've known Albert for many years now, and I've had a lot of privilege of working with him very closely with organizations, Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources. And Albert's wisdom and guidance and knowledge over the years has really helped shape our organization. And his concept of two-eyed seeing has brought so much richness to our work and our Indigenous-led conservation efforts in Unama'ki, but also across Canada and even internationally. Now Albert is known for his two-eyed seeing and his championing this concept of two-eyed seeing that he has gifted us. And today we just really want to take some time to honor that gift that Albert has shared and really have some wonderful people here that are going to speak to the work that they're doing and how they utilize two-eyed seeing to help to advance that work. Before we get started, I'm going to ask Albert if he would honor us with opening this meeting in a good way.
Thank you for having me. It's indeed an honor to be in your circle today. But today we're going to express our appreciation for being allowed to come together in a good way today and to share our words together so that the work that's ahead of us will be based on this multi-perspectives that we all have shared. So with that, Kiso, Walari Kitan, Eliasidelimia Kisko, Mawidanen. Walari Kitan, Eliginam Willa Galo Kisko Nago. Edamole Meliwis Pispan, Pantad Win Kamlamunal. Kalau maklum suara dan wajah nega, haji bodoh dia dan eksas dia harus suara. Kalau suara nega ina modal. Akin kegin wado sudah. Kegin amuinan melwis eksas dia. Kalau manam seduan. It will look what they will look on. Until no doubt, glad at it. Again, I'm winning many with the cross to the women. Raman, that called Kiso de Mayet. Will keep them said one, will have a seat. Until I'm more hit from home, my jiggy cold. Again, I'm winning 10 million for dinner. But I want to keep you to do. My guest to put here, she got with it with a marker one. Again, I'm winning Melody, making an old. But I'm on Lantil Walnut. I don't know what the makers. Or the other, Peter Amigina, and Kamlamuna. Again, I'm winning Melody, Menaja, we are working. Raman Mawan, the dears, I just have quite with Apple Mark. Again, when I men with pen or years employed. Raman, Cliff Swath of Shearson. And there's a coy quick in a visigar over Siscamo. Said the one of the age. Okay, so one of the age, they would have so much. He would can then many with Polari Hitante is a coy Kitiginam. Polari Hitante is a coy Kitibanagam. Tantene Hamasaloksia, Tanteloti. Nega Vigna Muinaptes, Ulodi, Tajikodi, Afantagodi. From a nega, this year will watch it and flew on that. Tanten Manualoksia, Ladadne. Basically, each day gives our gratitude for being allowed to walk upon our Mother Earth. We acknowledge and we give thanksgiving for everything that is put on here for us and for us to use with respect. We also thank the Creator for giving us the eyes in which we can look at everything from multi perspective. We thank the Creator for giving us our ears and to use those ears to listen and to act wherever there's a need to be fulfilled. And we go back to our eyes again and to ensure that every action that we do undertake always has to be in harmony with our Earth Mother. As well, our actions also have to be in harmony with the people that, not just people we work with, but for our people. Because each and every one of us have been given certain gifts, and for those gifts to be used freely for the benefit of all. And that word or concept, benefit for all, also always implies not just for the human, but for every living thing that is here for us. And now we have to also thank the Creator to keep giving us the support and the guidance so that we can do the work that is ahead of us. And we ask the Creator to strengthen our prayers for the other humans that have lost relationship to our Mother Earth, that they will come back with love, compassion, respect, and appreciation. Thank you very much.
Malal and Albert. So this session is being brought to you by the knowledge system stream of the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership. But we are also being co-hosted by the Center for Indigenous Knowledges and Languages. So I'd like to introduce you to Sean Hillier, who can give us a little more information about his organization.
So Kwayani Tenzi, good morning and afternoon to everyone across the country. My name is Sean Hillier. I'm a member of the Mi'kmaq Nation, a registered member of the Halapu First Nation. I grew up on the southwest coast of Newfoundland, but I'm joining you today from the area known as Tekaronto, and that has been and recognized the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm a York Research Chair in Indigenous Health Policy and One Health, but I have the distinct pleasure of being the Associate Director of the newly formed Center for Indigenous Knowledges and Languages at York University, and we're happy to be co-sponsoring this event today. We are a new research center located within York University that's focused on embedding and enhancing Indigenous scholarship at the institution and through all of our research. Our center brings together university researchers, community members, knowledge keepers, and elders to support Indigenous scholarship and Indigenous ways of knowing and being throughout both our institution and within the community. We're very happy to be partnering with the Conversation Through Reconciliation virtual campfire series today. If you're interested in learning more about us, we'd encourage you to visit our website or send us an email that we'll be posting in the chat shortly. Thank you, and we look forward to the conversation today.
Well, and Sean, before we begin, Allison Bishop from CRP is going to take you through a little bit of a housekeeping.
Awesome, thanks, and welcome everyone. I'll just wait. Christy's just going to put up some slides for me really quickly. So good to see so many folks here for the webinar today. There we go. Okay. So many of you are likely familiar with the CRP's virtual campfire series, but you'll notice that we're using a slightly different platform today for our session. So today's session will be recorded and also closed captioned. The closed captioning isn't perfect, so we're going to do our best to fill in the gaps in the chat and kind of correct the spellings of names in places where we can. And while we might not be able to see one another's video screens, you are able to interact with us in a few different ways. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll be able to see the chat function, which some of you are already using, which is wonderful. It looks like a speech bubble, and you have the choice to chat with us or share questions with the host and panelists directly or with everyone. So feel free to test it out and share where you're joining us from today. There's also a Q&A function, and it looks like two different speech bubbles. Here you can type in questions for the panelists anonymously, or you can share your name, totally up to you. And during the session, panelists might answer your question live as they're speaking, or they might type in an answer for you. And you also have the option to raise your hand, or the raise hand function. So if you click on this, you'll have an opportunity to unmute yourself once we've called on you, and you can speak to the panelists with your questions. As I mentioned earlier, the session will be recorded, and we'll be able to watch it on the CRP website and on our YouTube channel, and the links to those will be shared in the chat. And if you're interested in learning about upcoming webinars for the Virtual Campfire series, you can subscribe to our mailing list on our website, and we'll share that link as well. So looking forward to your engagement and questions today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Allison. So as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of this session, we're here to explore the principle of two-eyed seeing and how it has inspired conservation practices across what is now known as Canada, with some specific examples in some of the leaders in Indigenous-led conservation. So Elder Albert has taught us that two-eyed seeing, or Etuaptmumk, means learning to see from one eye with the strength of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, but also from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledge and ways of knowing, and learning to use both of these eyes together for the benefit of all. And he also reminds us that with that comes responsibility to act on the knowledge that we've gained. So, and then my recent conversation with Albert, it's this concept of acting on this knowledge is what he's really hoping to see, and as a next step in terms of enabling and then acting on this concept of two-eyed seeing. So to talk a little bit more about how different Indigenous communities and nations across this land are doing that, we have a number of great panelists and joining us today. Norma Cassie. Norma is the co-research director for the Canadian Mountain Network. She's also an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Science at McGill University, a citizen of the Vuntut First Nation, people of the lakes, the Wolf Clan. She was elected to Yukon's Legislative Assembly as a member for Vuntut First Nation in 1985 until 1992. And she's also a spokesperson on behalf of the Gwich'in people for the preservation of the porcupine caribou herd. And if anyone has ever heard Norma speaking about the caribou, you would know just the love and the passion and the work that she's done on behalf of her community, and the caribou is so inspiring. And I love hearing you talk, Norma, every time. I don't get tired of hearing you talk about your caribou. We also have Elliot Fox. He's Indigenous Community Liaison at the Resilience Institute. He is the member of the Kainai First Nation, or Blood Tribe. He has worked in the field of natural resource conservation in Southwest Alberta for the past 27 years as a fish, wildlife, forestry, rangeland, and climate adaptation technician. We also have Gary Pritchard, our Golden Eagle, or Genu, and I'm hoping I'm saying that, Gary. You told me how to say that right. I hope I got that. Gary is the principal Indigenous ecologist and engagement specialist with 4 directions of conservation consulting. He's from the Curve Lake First Nation in Ontario. Curve Lake First Nation in Ontario. He has successfully collaborated with many stakeholder groups, researchers, institutes, government agencies, Indigenous communities, and political organizations to address environmental concerns and identify practical solutions to environmental related issues. We also have joining us Crystal Mantika Pringle. She's a conservation planning biologist for Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada, an adjunct professor at the University of Saskatchewan. She works closely with First Nation communities, government, and other partners throughout the Yukon using a two-eyed seeing approach to collaborate on meaningful research projects and land use planning initiatives that reflect Indigenous environmental values. So, as you can see, lots of years of experience and knowledge on our panel today, and I think it's going to be a very exciting discussion. So make sure you write down all the questions that you want to ask at the end of the session. As Alison said, we're going to have a Q&A after we're done. I'm going to start with Norma. Norma, can you tell us why is it that two-eyed seeing is so important in the work that you do? Oh, Norma, you're on mute.
Of course. Thank you for that question, and good to see everyone here. Good morning and afternoon. Good to see you, Albert. Again, I saw you yesterday, other day as well, and it's good to see you all the time, and I hear your name everywhere. Gosh, and just really, it's something that you had enlightened everyone across this country and many places to work together with science and Western science and Indigenous ways to really try and work with making things better, especially what's going on in our planet. And I really thank you for that. It's really being helpful. Drin Gwinzi Shalaknai, Van Gwinzi, Drin what's Gihi Gwada bits at height no Jihnu. I just thank the Creator for being here today with you, and I'm glad to be here. I was born in Old Crow Flats, way up in the Arctic, in northern Yukon, and I was raised till I was 16 years old on the land, nothing around, 3 months out of the year in the springtime. And that is where I was pretty much grounded by my grandfather in every possible way. And telling me when I was quite young that we would be in this place today with our Mother Earth. And I've learned a lot. I guess what interested me in science and working with our land is just our own Indigenous knowledge and how much we really know about our place and our animals and the things that everything that we live with on the land. Behind me is my camp. That's how we live in Old Crow Flats. I just want to say that also I have always fought along with many of our Indigenous leaders across this country over the years to be acknowledged for the knowledge, be acknowledged for the traditional knowledge that we do carry, the ancient knowledge that we do carry. And I just want to talk about a few things that I have worked on. In 1996, there was a study done by the governments in the north, and they found organochlorines and PCBs in levels in breast milk of Indigenous women. And it was at that time that I was manager of the Council of Yukon First Nations Environmental Department, and all the national Aboriginal organizations got together because this was a very scary time, all this contaminants gravitating to the Arctic and accumulating in our mother's breast milk and in the humans that live in the Arctic. So we were quite concerned, and the elders advised us to immediately to get together with government, like right away, and get together with scientists right away. And so we did, and it was at that time that we were able to create our own lab at the Center for Indigenous and Nutrition and Environmental Health as an arm of McGill University, working with Dr. Harriet Kuhnlein. And it was there that, I brought couple of hundred species of plants and edible foods from the Yukon Territory, just went to people and asked for things in their freezer and stuff like that. What we ate, everything we ate, we brought to the Dene Nation, the Métis, and the Inuit, all created a board of directors, and we brought food to that lab to be tested by the scientists. And the outcome of that was the benefits far outweighed the minute levels of organochlorines within our bodies. So we had to make good news, big news, redo all that again. Do not deter yourselves, especially if you're breastfeeding. Continue to breastfeed, and to across the north, we had to bring that strong message because we found our own, we developed our own knowledge on this, and were able to bring good news back to our people. Now it's in all humans in this world. And the other thing is that they working with COSEWIC, for example, on endangered species as an ATK committee for several years. We tried to go out there and do the traditional knowledge. Actually, as an Indigenous committee, we wanted the money to go out there and collect Aboriginal traditional knowledge to contribute to the endangered species of that's happening in Canada and the species that are going to be listed. And they never ever gave us money to do that. We just sat there as a committee and continued to say the same thing for several years, over 10 years, and it's still ongoing today. We were never able, I guess, to bring traditional knowledge to the forefront to list endangered species. So now we're here. We have endangered species all over declining in our country, and we're still struggling as Indigenous peoples to bring that to the forefront in conservation. You guys, Lisa mentioned the caribou. If we did not work close with the scientists, we would not be, and the environmentalists, we would not have gone as far as we did to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from development of oil and gas in the sacred calving grounds. We worked together, and we had a strong strategy from our elders. They talked to us and counseled us for 8 days, and then, or 4 days, and then they chose 8 of us to represent from the entire Gwich'in Nation. And this was the biggest gathering of my people in 100 years, in 1988. So they gave us all our Indigenous knowledge about the caribou that we're going to carry for 4 days, and in our language, and they carried a talking stick. And they counseled us, and the whole communities were listening, just packed. The environmentalists came in there with an agenda, and the elders threw that out. This 100-year-old elder got up and said, "No, we're not taking your agenda. We're talking to our young people. We're going to teach them now in this 4 days." So they threw that out. So the environmentalists sat on the side, and they had to listen, and we took over. So our Indigenous knowledge and strategy led that campaign. It created an incredible strategy and very heartfelt for us who understood our language. And so then they chose 8 of us to spread across the country and start advocating. And the strongest recommendation was youth walk beside the environmentalists, use the scientific information, get the scientists to work with our porcupine caribou and let us know all the way the results of their findings. And so we partnered up. It was under our government in 1985 that David Porter created the International Porcupine Caribou Herd Board and the in Canada user groups Porcupine Management Board. So we are able to come to this time at this day, thank Creator and everything all the way, all just amazing people worked on this issue. And so now we have 200,000 caribou left in the porcupine caribou herd, and climate change and everything else is coming affecting the herd in every way along their migration route. And and now we're really still continuing that work. We're going to have to continue it into the future, given what's going on in the planet now still. So that's another thing where it was so important to work with researchers. And then I went on in 2007, created the Arctic Institute of Community-Based Research along with my friend Jody Butler Walker. She was instrumental in the study that detected the organochlorines in the breast milk of our women. And so anyways, we created community-based research all over the Yukon. Those were Indigenous led. We had the Yukon people let us know what the kinds of research they wanted to do. And coming up to now, as co-research director of the Canadian Mountain Network, we got $18.3 million a few years ago in 2017 or 18. And we created the Canadian Mountain Network and are now doing research, Indigenous-led research, and it hasn't been an easy road. It's been a struggle all along, especially trying to work with institutional policies, and those are a real challenge. However, we are doing the research at the community level, which is really, really great. People are researching their caribou to create traditional laws, more traditional laws on all their species within their traditional area and the Taku River Tlingit area. The Yukon Salmon Committee is now going to collect traditional knowledge that they can be able to utilize and take to the Pacific Salmon table later on, or in these continued negotiations at the Pacific Salmon Treaty table, the international one. And also the young people are always involved with all these hubs that we created in the Canadian Mountain Network. And the young people are now going to be learning from every phase of those research that we have on caribou, buffalo, the bringing back of the buffalo, and in Alberta and over in Choctaw, there's also a project over there, and I forget what it's called. Sorry, Lisa. So a lot of research going on in those areas and in these hubs that we've created with scientists and Indigenous peoples working together. And I can really see how the non-Indigenous young scientists are really enthusiastic about working with Indigenous peoples and learning from them. And we have to work with them and we have to educate them, just like Albert has set this direction for us. And I'm always following that in most of my life now. I follow that, and almost every day and stuff that I do. And so we do a lot of work, and I just want to open with that and thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm also a co-director of I'm also an advisor to the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, along with several awesome leaders from across Canada. And it's in our everyday work to bring, create land guardians across the country, being boots on the ground, taking care of our species, you working with scientists. They want to, and I'm now doing a research project across Canada called The Benefits of Land Guardians and the Challenges. So I've now interviewed 36 people, and I will create a baseline curriculum with training curriculum, land-based training curriculum for land guardians and other young people going forward. So that's my contribution this morning.
Thank you so much for that, Norma, and such a wonderful work that you're doing. So we heard from Norma how she and her people are using two-eyed seeing and traditional knowledge at like an institutional and research level, but also what I'm hearing, Norma, is the importance of and people realizing that traditional knowledge is a knowledge system. We talk about that not in the context of within our traditional governance and law. So important that plays a part in framing and how you do things and how you approach things. So that's so wonderful for you to share. Thank you, Norma. We have Elliot Fox also. I'm wondering, Elliot, could you tell us a little bit how you incorporate traditional knowledge and worldviews and systems into your work with management and protection of natural resources?
I think we've lost Elliot, and I'm going to try to find him for you.
Oh my goodness, I didn't even notice that he dropped off. Okay, we seem to have lost Elliot. Okay, well, I see that Gary is still with us. Hi, Gary. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about your experience with using two-eyed seeing and the work that you do in the field?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Hi, everybody. Just to give a little background of where I'm from Curve Lake First Nation, which is just an hour north of Toronto, really. So we're very much an urban-ish kind of First Nation. We do still suffer from no drinking water in our community as well. The 7 of us that live in the urban central of Ontario, 5 of our communities don't have drinking water, and we're actually going through a process to rectify that right now. But we have a huge pressure of development in our territory. We have Toronto, we have all the expansion of the city of Vaughan up to Barrie, all the way over towards Ottawa, and that leaves a huge dent in our territory from natural green space, and we have lots of urban, I call them urban endangered species and urban bioconnectivity challenges to actually allow animals to leave our territory and migrate to the boreal forest. And we've actually recently proved in our research that the Highway 400 that I fear every day when I drive to home to my community is the actual migration corridor that these animals are using, just like us, to go home. And it's been pretty interesting. And the work we've been doing lately as Curve Lake has been really helping proponents. And when I use the term proponents, I talk about governments, different regulatory governments, different people doing projects in our territory, whether it is a pipeline company or a transit company or a power generation company. Try to understand when we say we want to create ethical space and use both knowledge systems to actually create suitable governance for the environment. And we just finished a big forestry review as a community, and that was one of the interesting things. The first time I ever saw this, and I thought of Albert and I thought of the CRP when this happened, was we actually went to a meeting as our nation, and they actually told us that they actually contracted a consultant to create ethical space for all of us. And we're like, that's a thing now? And we didn't know that was a thing as a nation. And we thought that was really awkward, because if you understand where we're from, we've been denied access to our traditional territory for 100 years, and we just settled that court case back in 2018. And now we're going through the process of educating everybody, hey, we're still actually here. We haven't disappeared from the landscape. We're trying to reassert our rights and work together in a state of co-governance together. And that's been really challenging, because what actually happens to us as a nation is that we actually find when we try to introduce our values and our knowledge systems into Western science and management, we often get blamed and a lot of negativity put on us, but we're actually working with the proponents to do really interesting work. We actually brought up the idea of reimagining what does crown lands mean. In the term, I don't like the term crown lands, and as a result of our new settlement in 2018, one of our elders, Tom Cowie from Hiawatha First Nation, actually calls the crown lands unceded lands, and it was really interesting when we presented this to Canadians in Canada. It really confused them, but we're just saying these are lands that were meant to be shared together, and we're all going to collectively harvest off these lands together and benefit from these lands together. It's just not timber. It's also a spiritual spot. It's also a spot where we can go and gather our food and our medicines. And it was really interesting to be a part of those conversations, because now we are trying to do rights assertion while including all people and all beings within our framework. We actually introduced the term Indigenous world views of cultural keystone species. That was a fairly new conversation, and they were thinking it was just species at risk, and we were actually, no, it's the moose, it's the maple tree, it's the white-tailed deer. And having those conversations, we are the people of the salmon. We're the salmon people from Lake Ontario, and now we actually don't have Atlantic salmon. And that's one of the things that I often talk about, is the restoration of Atlantic salmon in our territory. And we've never used Indigenous knowledge systems in the restoration of that fish. We put a lot of money into it and a lot of Western science, but we still need to bring in that Indigenous knowledge piece. We also need to ask for forgiveness from the Creator, because it was actually settler greed that actually removed that fish from our territory and our landscape. And we need to ask for forgiveness. So before we can even start the healing process for that species. More recently, if you live in the GTA, the Greater Toronto area, you'll understand when I say this. I studied the red-side dace. It's a small 3-inch minnow that's endangered in Ontario, and we're doing actually a combination of Western science and Indigenous knowledge systems to find out what are the best plant medicines to plant to help restore its habitat in those damaged systems around Toronto. We're also using, from Western science side, technology to actually help monitor them without invading their space. So we're trying to develop camera trapping technology so we get pictures of these fish to show that they're there. We don't need to be electrifying the water to hurt them and maybe cause them harm. We're actually just trying to take a picture of them. So we're working through that. We're still struggling with our how to include Indigenous knowledge, our scientific designs. I can openly admit that. We're working at how to not cherry pick Indigenous knowledge systems to help suit the scientific design, but actually work to blend the knowledge together. And that's a challenge. We have a lot of challenges in Southern Ontario. It's pretty interesting what we're doing, but what we've been doing is actually working with proponents to actually voice our conservation goals. That's a big piece. People don't know what our conservation goals are as the Mississauga or the Mississauga people. And we're actually trying to teach them humility that, you know, Western science is still a foreign knowledge system coming to our landscape, and it needs to be nurtured alongside Indigenous knowledge systems to help protect and restore these damaged territories. And we're trying to create valued-oriented criteria. And that's actually things that both non and Indigenous people use on the landscape. So if we lose white-tailed deer, collectively we're affecting all people. If we lose brook trout, we affect all people. And that's one of the things that people aren't really getting in our territory, is that we're trying to use our rights assertion to help all people. It's been really interesting to have that conversation. We're actually helping them delineate treaty boundaries, because our treaty boundaries are a hot mess in Southern Ontario. My community has signed 18 different treaties in Southern Ontario. So every day we don't know roughly which exact treaty we're in. And we usually make jokes while we're driving the different highways. Okay, I think we're still in this territory, not this one. And we're providing cultural awareness training for people who want to work with us, because there's such a lack of education in Southern Ontario. And I'll go out on a limb and say, assuming it's all of Canada, about Indigenous people, that they really don't know what's happening and what's the goals of our community. Something that we're doing really exciting tomorrow. I'm going home tomorrow. We're actually doing our first Indigenous Knowledge Harvester Symposium. And we've got some sponsors to do that, to help us with that, to present that data to people. And we have non-Indigenous researchers helping us do that so they can actually learn from our members. We're actually creating timing windows. So in Western science, you have the timing windows to help delineate projects. But we're also saying, hey, by the way, did you know we harvest moose during this month? Can you not harvest that area until our people are done? Right, and or sharing some kind of government. And this seems to be going quite well, but we're still trying to get some footing to learn how to work together, and we're trying to break down the fear barrier. There's a lot of fear when we come to the table, and we're trying to really fix that. That's our first goal, is to make so people aren't so afraid to actually have those conservation conversations with us, for sure. I'll pass it back to you, Lisa.
Thank you for that, Gary. Yeah. Just what comes to mind when you're speaking of the challenges that you've been facing is, one thing that Albert always reminds us is that two-eyed seeing is a co-learning journey. It's something that we always have to be working on and working towards. And you mentioned a good point about ethical space. And we talk about, well, it's difficult to take those first steps on that journey together if it's not done in a proper way, if ethical space is not created to allow you guys to kind of explore what does that mean. And like you said, like blending those two knowledge systems together, you need that space, right? You need that freedom and that ability to explore and look at what that looks like. So I think you guys are doing some really great work on that. And I see Elliot, we got you back. We lost you for a minute there. I'm worried because he looks like he's not moving. I don't know if he's having connection problems still. Elliot, are you with us? Allison, I think he might still be having trouble with his connection.
Yeah, it looks like it, Lisa. We'll ask Elliot to call in on the phone.
All right. But in the meantime, we have Crystal with us. Hi, Crystal. How are you? In guiding Indigenous nations and governments to find ways of weaving traditional knowledge and Indigenous conservation efforts, what's some lessons and experiences that you can share with our group today?
Sure. What an honor and duty and responsibility of being here as the only non-Indigenous panelist. So I knew I would be nervous. And for that reason, I have a couple of pictures I'd like to share while I speak. Can you see Red Barn? Okay. So most of you are probably thinking the same thing that I am. And my first thought when I was contacted and asked to be part of this panelist was, why am I invited? I'm non-Indigenous. I'm actually a descendant of Ukrainian immigrants that fled Ukraine earlier in the 1900s. And I thought to myself quite deeply, what could I have to say that actually has value to Indigenous teachings? And I really thought I have no place in being here. But then I took some time and I thought about how other possibly younger non-Indigenous scientists or conservation practitioners must also feel in this place. And when taking on similar work and possibly wanting to reach out and work with communities, but unsure of how to start. So I thought to myself, well, perhaps I do have some teachings to share. This Red Barn is a 100-year-old Ukrainian farm where I was raised in Saskatchewan. Robin Wall Kimmer, in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, she talks about non-Indigenous immigrants and how they can still feel Indigenous to place. She talks about how being a good immigrant neighbor and how once this invasive plant, known as white man footsteps, or also Plantigo major, which is an invasive plant that followed settlers' footsteps as an aggressive weed. And it was actually eventually welcomed into Indigenous communities by providing medicine through its leaves for digestion and healing wounds. So my purpose today, or I guess teaching, is to be useful and earn the name as being naturalized to place, which means to me, live as if this is the land that feeds you. It's in this space or teachings that I give my gifts through my work as if my children's future matters and depend on it. So with each step that I take in both in my work life and personal life, it's with this wholesome, naturalized to place intent. And so I therefore practice reconciliation in all aspects of my life, including personal and in professional. And I really try my best to take action by showing and doing rather than teaching. So what does this look like? There are several visualizations and definitions of two-eyed seeing. We've heard the concept of two-eyed seeing already this morning, which is seeing world with two eyes, one from Indigenous knowledge and another from Western science. But there are also other concepts that are quite well known. Joe Copperjack from Yukon He has a stream bank approach, which is a conceptual of worldviews not being inclusive, but knowledges that actually regard each other, but not necessarily meeting or bridging. Braiding sweetgrass from Wob and Walkimmer, that's known, is more about weaving together the knowledge systems, 2 strands, braiding sweetgrass. And then a more westernized approach is the Venn diagram on the right, which is areas with and without that overlap. It's more of a Western visualization of in the middle. For me, two-eyed seeing is much more than this. It's not a diagram or a definition. It's about building meaningful relationships and having no expectations, no set protocols. I actually introduce myself in my work as an ally and one that respects Indigenous teachings. And I take this, this work really, really to heart and also really serious. Two-eyed seeing is much more than, to me, about knowledge sharing or integrating different worldviews. It's actually about helping, a duty of share, care, and respect. It's about helping in small ways, sometimes unlearning my own academic and scientific teachings, giving if asked, and just sharing a love for the natural world and being connected to all beings. And this comes through gratitude and respect. So in the Yukon, I have privilege of working closely with several Yukon First Nations, and I've worked with other communities elsewhere throughout Canada on land use planning initiatives and also other conservation initiatives. I do lead and collaborate on research projects with Indigenous partners. And I guess as a conservation practitioner and scientist, I take reconciliation to heart from everything that I do. And it's all in all aspects of my work. So this involves, I guess, if you're coming into this work and not unsure where to start, it's about listening, building trust and respectful relationships that co-learning, but also co-appreciating, and building capacity. That's a really big one. I have the honor of working with First Nations and building capacity within to aim for conservation outcomes that serve both the environment as well as the needs of the communities that I work with. And this isn't easy. It's sometimes science has no place for that conversation, and that's okay. But most of the time, the work that I do is about caring for the same values and offering a hand to aid in the land use plans, and that might be in the concept of science, or that might be in the concept of bridging traditional knowledge and Western science. The research projects that I lead are on the socio kind of environmental understanding of cumulative effects, and that includes both traditional knowledge and Western science concepts, and kind of even technical expertise out on the land. And ways to bridge those understandings into more conservative conservation planning techniques for their own consideration, not for mine. The work that we do is Indigenous led, and we're there as an ally to build capacity and provide tools or expertise, knowledge sharing and bridging so that it can be considered for Indigenous led conservation. If you think, well, geez, that's a lot, but I really still don't know where to start. And if you haven't already, I recommend reading this paper, which is about 10 calls to action to mainstream reconciliation in all aspects of science. And it was also led by a team of co-authors, mostly from the Yukon. So it's really about taking a step back and considering all aspects and where we can kind of take a step forward together, and that duty of sharing, caring, and respect. So with that, I will pass on to the next panelist.
Thank you, Crystal. And yeah, that's exactly where my mind went when I was listening to you speak, is that it's all about, yeah, we can't change the past, but what we can do is work to figure out how we can move forward together. So yeah, thank you for that. And I think Elliot was able to call in. Elliot, are you there? You're still on mute, Elliot. Oh, and there's a comment, if someone's able to share that article in the chat. Some people are interested in reading that. Oh, there's Elliot. Elliot, how are you?
Hello. Hi, I'm good. My apologies. Most days my internet connection is pretty good, but for whatever reason, I keep cutting out today. So Murphy's Law, I guess.
Well, you're with us now. Good timing. So when I read your bio, 27 years working in the field, in the conservation field, you must have a lot that you've learned over the years, and maybe you can tell us in your work the idea of two-eyed seeing and how that's helped kind of advance the work that you've been doing.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Okay, Nixokoax. It connects Matsimpoa Giskanatuni. Still on the goat Makoyo Kinni. Hello, all my relations. Good to hear everyone this morning. Yeah, that was in our Blackfoot language here. My name is Elliot Fox. I was born and raised on the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. So I'm out here on the prairie, but I'm about a half-hour drive to the mountains. I'm a member of the Kainai, or Blood Tribe Nation, and we're part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I'm a graduate of Lethbridge College in the Renewable Resource Management Environmental Science program, and that was back in 1994. I guess I chose this career path because I wanted to work outside on the land as opposed to being in an office. Anyway, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge our Mi'kmaq elder, Albert Marshall, for his prayer, his great wisdom and foresight, and advocacy for inclusion of the Indigenous ways of knowing and conservation practices, finally, across what is now known as Canada, but has been the home of Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. I would also like to thank the Center for Indigenous Knowledges and Languages, the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, Robin Roth and Christy, for inviting me to be a part of this panel and discussion. And thank you, Norma, Gary, and Crystal, for your very wise words. I can certainly relate to your frustrations, but we just have to keep moving forward, I guess, to try to make things better to sustain our healthy landscapes for our children and grandchildren. I can say grandchildren now because of my grandpa. I'm very honored and humbled to be asked to participate with some great leaders and individuals today involved in conservation. Yeah, so I guess I'm just going to talk a little bit about Indigenous knowledge as it relates to our people here. So as the Blackfoot people and the Blood Tribe here in southern Alberta, we have every summer what we call our big camp, or Akukatsin is what we call it. But a lot of people, now call it the Sundance. And to us, it's an annual celebration to give thanks for our, having life for another year, and to pray for that we have life for, the future. We've retained our traditional ways, our ceremonies, and our practices, even though they were outlawed over 100 years ago. We practiced them in secret. We hid from the government and continued our annual big camp. So I'm going to start with, I guess, Parks Canada, and in my case, it would be Waterton Lakes National Park here. That's part of my home territory. I grew up, I was lucky because my uncle taught me how to, he was a trapper. So he taught me how to trap. I used to go with him, check his trap line. He taught me how to hunt. He taught me how to fish. So he really connected me to the land, which was awesome. He's gone now, but his knowledge, I guess, I'm still trying to retain it and continue it. Yeah, so with Parks Canada as an example, you know, with the removal of keystone species, like in our case out on the prairie here, bison, fire suppression, and the introduction of non-native species, fish species here in the Waterton area. They introduced non-native fish for sport. So now we can see that they're outcompeting our native fish here in southern Alberta. Our native trout are bull trouts and West Slope cutthroat trout, but they're disappearing. And so we can see over the years how past management of some of our natural landscapes has just not been done properly. So we're almost in damage control now. And so now we're witnessing the importance of inclusion of Indigenous ways of knowing and land and species management to sustain what's left, these wild and natural landscapes. Here on the prairie, just east of the mountains, we're part of what's called the Crown of the Continent ecosystem. And it's been called the water tower of North America. So a lot of our water, at least here in Western Canada, comes from our mountains and the snow melt and all that. But, you know, over the past, since I guess colonization, a lot of our prairie landscape has been cultivated. And southern Alberta has the largest irrigation systems in Canada and are taking a significant amount of water from the rivers. So it's a really cumulative effect that's taking place on our land with you know, global warming, dewatering of our rivers, habitats, you know, loss through development. But you know, there's still hope, and some of the work I've been involved in, you know, in the past, I was lucky to study wolves that returned to Waterton in 1994. They had been gone for 40 years because they had been poisoned and eliminated. But they recolonized southern Alberta naturally. I was studying the Belly River wolf pack to use that Belly River area in southern Alberta as you know, most of their home range. They were, I guess, established from a lone wolf that dispersed north out of Glacier National Park in Montana, and she was radio collared. And so I was very lucky my job was to track her and follow her every day. But at a distance, I couldn't disturb her and the other pack while they were, you know, where I'd find them. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's still a pretty wild landscape here. Wolves are a keystone species. I was part of we brought back a herd of bison to our blood reserves here last year. And they've been gone for about 140 years. So they're back. We're trying to expand their range out here on the native prairie. And then I'm involved in, I guess, a native trout recovery project with the Blackfoot Confederacy Tribal Council, looking at those two species of trout in the Bow and the Oldman River watersheds. And I'm also involved with a Blackfoot Knowledge Hub, supported by the Canadian Mountain Network and Norma and her colleagues. We're just developing that. And it's kind of morphed into guardianship of the eastern slopes in Alberta, which would be the eastern slopes of the mountains. So we're taking a holistic management approach, where we're trying to. So it's evolving as we speak. In fact, I'm going to a meeting tomorrow with some of our elders, try to figure out, okay, how can we weave for lack of a better term, our traditional ways with, current Western science conservation. So it's an interesting, it's interesting to observe, how this is taking place. But with the trout project, we're out in the fields. We're building capacity with some of our Blackfoot technicians. There's 3 Blackfoot tribes in Alberta and 1 in Montana. So they spend time in the field with us, and we've been training them how to take environmental DNA samples from the water. That tells us what kind of fish are in there or what kind of trout without electrofishing or catching them. So it's pretty cool technology. We're installing water temperature data loggers, doing stream habitat restoration, and doing spawning bed surveys. And the last component of our project is I've been interviewing Blackfoot elders on the significance of fish and water in some of our places in our territory. It's been really interesting to hear from them how these things are really significant. So we've incorporated some of our Indigenous ways, like when we go out now, wherever we're going, whatever stream, we make an offering of tobacco when we take water samples, when we do spawning surveys, whatever we do, we have incorporated making an offering of tobacco to give thanks for the data we're collecting. And so to me, I think it's getting gaining more momentum across the country, which is awesome. And Parks Canada has done a lot better lately. Alberta Environment has a lot of work to do, but they seem to be progressing a bit, because like some of the speakers earlier said, our input in the past has been ignored and we haven't been funded. So I can say in my experience, it's gotten a lot better. So, as much of our landscape that's been lost, there's a lot of it still left that we can sustain. So I think working with our Indigenous communities across the country and with our Western science counterparts, with some of the government agencies, I think moving forward, it's going to get better. So they respect now our ways of knowing and don't look at it as a lesser science. In fact, some of the work we're doing and incorporating some of our Blackfoot ways, we're calling it Blackfoot science. And I'm sure that can be the case across the country. I've met Mi'kmaq, I've met Gwich'in people, I've met Coast Salish, I've met Cree, Anishinaabe, I've met a lot of our Indigenous peoples across the country, Inuits. So it's been great for me, a great learning experience, but it's really, I guess, what would you say, motivating, inspiring to see that our people are still out there. We're still here. We're not going anywhere. And we just got to keep living the way we know best. And I think by doing that, and that's how we survived, obviously, all those thousands of years, right? So I guess we just got to continue that. So I'm going to end there. I hope I've made some sense, but thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you, Elliot. Such interesting stuff you're doing. It's wonderful work. And yeah, absolutely, right? Like it's not just not looking at our knowledge systems about what we know or how we know, but how we apply that knowledge through our traditional understandings of the proper ways to live on this earth, right? That's important. And Albert often talks about looking at things in a holistic way. So with that, I'm actually, I'll turn it over to Albert, just for some maybe final thoughts and reflections on what you've heard today.
Thank you. First of all, I think I would like to say A in Mi'kmaq. And wow, that's wow in our language. Why I say this is because I believe this is something we hope, but nobody ever imagined how this concept would eventually take root. And what I have learned just in a brief period of time here is really amazing how that concept has manifested and actually put into action. And it not only has made an impression, but actually made differences in how people should see their natural world. And no longer, I am sure, people are no longer looking at our natural world as an object, but more so as a subject. So again, I thank from the core of my heart the work that you have done, the work that you are doing, in which I believe, again, it's a testament in which we've all been saying for years that this true I seeing concept was so inherent to the Aboriginal ways of thinking, in which each and every one of us, no matter where we come from and who we are, always saw a great opportunity on the part of humans, and that is, to the best of our ability, that every action, gesture, or phrase has to be in harmony with nature, as well has to be in harmony with our two-legged, because we are the ones that have to do the work that will be done because of the cognitive mind we have. And with that, I would like to, not on behalf, express my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers, but especially to our creator for allowing us and creating this opportunity of this wonderful exchange, which I believe, whatever the intent was, to me, were so profound that what has been shared today was such an empowering energy, especially for us here that it's over 20, close to 30 years since this concept was first crafted into what now known as true I seeing. And of course, the message that was intended to be part of that was not only to look at everything from a holistic perspective, but look at it from your own lens, based on the knowledge, wisdoms, and so on, that has been left for you through your language and through your culture. But the underlying factor was to use that knowledge in a way in which will benefit all. And that all is important, because our efforts has to be just as beneficial to the very source of life in which we all depend upon, which is made up with all these different species, because we solely depend upon them for our own physical subsistence, as well our own spiritual awareness. We thank the Creator for the good words that have been exchanged today. And we will continue as the Creator to help the rest of our brothers and sisters that have somehow found themselves so disconnected from this beautiful creation of ours, that they would find somehow to return to the old ways with love, compassion, respect, and appreciation. And to thank you and for us to be aware that we humans have responsibility and nature has rights. And with that, I believe as well, we're going to ask the Creator to give us support, guidance, so that this work will be carried on as it was intended for all of us, of ensuring that during our short stay here, it is our human responsibility of ensuring that not only this generation here will be able to sustain themselves in a good way, but also leave something much more productive for the next 7 generations. Because the lessons and the knowledges and the wisdom that we are bringing forth now will also be just as important, maybe much more important in the future, because nature is such a constant flux that we have so many challenges today, but it's very, very difficult for us to imagine how those how those will look like in the future. But I guess by knowing that the people from the past did everything right, they will too find strength to carry on the work that is required by all of us. Thank you again, and I wish you the very best. I wish you love, good energy to continue the work that you are doing. And with that, I know you are loved, we are loved, and we are appreciated. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Albert. And before we close, we do have some time for some Q&A. And I apologize because I know it's loud on my end. My heater kicked in or something at the hotel. I'm going to go shut it off in a second. Before I do that, I have a question for you, Norma. Someone was curious about, has there been any work around endangered species that you and your colleagues were able to move forward through COSEWIC?
I was on the Aboriginal Traditional Knowledge Committee way back when, with many people, Jeanette Armstrong, who is now a renowned professor in this country, Sue Chibolo, Henry Lickers, and people like that. And we did our best to advise the COSEWIC, the Committee on Species at Risk, representatives of the Government of Canada. And we tried really hard to encourage the possibility of our people to actually go out and collect that knowledge on those species from an Indigenous perspective. And I have not been involved now for several years, but being the almost 10 years or long time on there, 5 years, I forgot how many, but we were there. We started way back when we didn't make much headway in terms of getting the finances and resources to actually go out and collect that knowledge. However, it's really, we're in a better place now with land guardians across the country, collecting data, engaging with our animals and our biodiversity, and trying really hard to preserve what's left right now. So that's a real positive. And if we could focus on growing these land guardians and the training of land guardians in all our communities, I think it will really help the revitalization of our species. Like the animals like to have us around. They get happy when they see us. They come to life. We do ceremonies with them. We talk to them. We engage with them. Our guardians are doing that from a very profound spiritual perspective and connectivity. So if we all focus on those, our guardians and other Indigenous peoples, and listening to Crystal today and what she has learned and what she's engaged in now, and bringing that perspective is really, really awesome. I love hearing that from non-Indigenous folks as well, that, you know, that it's amazing that we can work together in that way. And that's what Albert has advised us to do. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Norma. Gary, I have a question for you. In your talk, you mentioned that there's sometimes when you go to the table with non-Indigenous people, there's what you perceive as to be a sense of fear about what you guys are bringing to the table. Someone's asked if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that experience.
Yeah, for sure. The reason why I call it fear is actually because they tell me they're afraid. So it's actually quite awkward. Pre-COVID, we used to actually have people come to our council chambers, and we'd host a meal and actually tried to make them feel welcome in our community. And then during COVID, it was even more awkward because it's all virtual in this setting, and I don't have a camera on my computer, so you just see this photo taken of me all the time. But a lot of them are really concerned, and I actually was given a document the other day to review, and like, in the spirit of reconciliation, however, Gary, please don't alter the document too much that we have to rewrite it. I'm like, well, that's not meaningful at all. And some of the comments were like, hey, you know, we're trying to do rights assertion, but and they don't know how, and they're actually really afraid that we're going to say something that disrupts their whole system. And I'll use conservation. I'm actually giving this talk to more land trust community, and I said to them, how come every time, and these are all ex-retired government people who's made these decisions across our territory that's really negatively affected it, and they actually said, well, we don't want you to do this. We want to conserve lands together, but we don't want you to do this. And my joke back to them was, because those who do know me, I like to kind of throw little jokes at you. I'm like, well, I can't do that because when you're a government employee, you permitted all those things away, and we can't do them anymore. And they were so afraid that we're going to do something that impacts the way they believe. And I'm like, no, we just want to be able to maybe go harvest some medicines in there, harvest rice, and be a part of the ecosystem that we've been kept off. It's interesting, if you look at our territorial rights and our treaty rights, it actually says I come from ironically, I come from a community with no clean water, but I come from a very water-rich area of central Ontario. And it says in our treaty that no non-Indigenous people can live on an island, right? Those are Indian lands. And so that's a big deal. And if you look at Ontario in our treaty area, it actually says no non-Indigenous people can live in the Muskokas, right? And that's a big deal in Ontario. That's prime real estate. That's where everybody wants to live. Shania Twain lives there. Like, everybody lives there. And it's such a big deal. And I said, we're not going to kick you off out of your house. We never once thought we're going to kick you out of your home. And we never go there. But they always assume we're going to go so negative on them. where we just actually want to have a conversation and have a dialogue, right? Like, can you maybe move your project instead of actually, because my family has always harvested there for so long. And like, actually a great example is one of the spots where I was actually named at this spot is now infilled. The river has completely been moved. And so where I was named, I can't even go back to honor that because it doesn't exist anymore. It's a condo. So that's part of it, right? But yet I'm the negative one sometimes when I come to the table. And if you do catch us on a Friday and it's been a rough week, I'm sorry, it's been a rough week, and that's just part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely right. Crystal, as someone who's always demonstrated that they've made a really wholehearted attempt at being an ally to Indigenous communities, can you say from your experience some things that you would say to someone to maybe alleviate some of that fear, drawing from your experience and working and having good relationships with the communities?
Sure. I think it's about committing to a purpose rather than committing to any individual project. And that's, I was just reviewing some of the questions. That's a huge barrier. That's a huge barrier when it comes to colonial systems that are forced by deadlines, and Norma touched base on this in terms of the institutional conflicts. And so I guess my response would not just commit to the purpose of the two-eyed seeing, but also committing yourself in advocating and leading for change, pushing boundaries in your own institutions or in your own government that acknowledges and has that ethical space. Through, I guess, someone who is just coming into this new space and unsure how best to do that. It's a process that takes time. There are certain material and training that you can sign up for that is led through Indigenous institutions that can provide a start, and then doing your own homework. And that's your duty. That's all of our duty as Canadians, and sharing this land is not just acknowledging the land that we live and rely on, but also acknowledging our past and our future. So I guess in the work that I do in building trust and partnerships, it's about working for conservation impact that benefits both the environmental concerns, but also the Indigenous concerns as well.
Thank you, Crystal. I see a question here for Elliot. Elliot, someone was very intrigued about your concept of Blackfoot science and the various monitoring programs that you were doing. They're wondering if there's any documentation available on that work. They think it might be relevant to some of the work that they're doing in relation to their exercises and their efforts for conservation. And there's actually an email that was shared that they would hope that you would send that to. Is there anything that you have from your work that you're able to share with others? There we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Yeah. Well, I guess with the project, the native trout recovery project we're working on, we're entering our third and final year of that. So we have to report. It's funded by DFO Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So obviously we have to report to them every year of some of the work we're doing. So we've got a technical, Western science report of the data we've collected and some of our findings and recommendations. But we've also got a separate summary of our Blackfoot elders interviews. So they've shared a lot of a lot of their knowledge and stories. So once those interviews are, I guess, screened, because we don't want any like site sensitive or culturally sensitive information being shared with the public, just because we wouldn't want any of that to be exploited. So yeah, we have last year's reports, just finishing this year's report, and we'll have our third year report next year. So in those reports will be some of those elders' interviews and stories of some of the significance of fish and water to our people. Yeah, so it was really interesting when I was involved with the buffalo. It was a repatriation or reintroduction, but what it turned out to be was we ended up calling it the Kainai, which is the blood tribe, Ini, which is a Blackfoot word for buffalo. So the Kainai Buffalo Rematriation Holistic Management Plan. And bison have been gone for a long time, and they just got back here last year. So what I learned just developing the management plan with one of our elders, and there's a bison expert we hired that's retired now. He was a warden with Parks Canada, but he's a very well-respected bison expert now. His name's Wes Olson. He was our consultant on the science part of bison. But it was really interesting, because they're such a keystone species, and they impact the whole landscape, not only on the prairie. They're in the mountain. They were in the mountains too, right? So it was really interesting to learn when you bring bison back, they change the whole landscape. Like they'll because they're not fed or given steroids or immunizations. They're just natural. So everything from their they call them dung pats, but they're buffalo pies or buffalo yeah. So even from that, when they come back, beetles that have been gone since they've been gone will start coming back. Birds that have been gone since they've been gone are coming back. And I didn't know this, but the birds will line their nests with bison fur that's shed to insulate their nests better and to waterproof their nests better. And when they wallow and they roll around on the ground, they create these depressions in the land, where in the spring it creates these ephemeral little wetland areas. So amphibians come back. So it's just been so cool to learn about how much of an impact they have when they return to the landscape. And they don't. My uncle has his own bison herd here. He's been raising them for a little over 15 years. He's never had to pull a calf. He's never lost a calf. They're very resilient. They require less food than cattle. They're more efficient in processing, grazing. So, it's just really interesting to see how much of an impact they have, and, they affect the whole landscape. So hopefully, our objective here is to put them out on all our native prairie, which is about, our reserve here is about around 350,000 acres. I'm old school, so I'm using imperial. About 350,000 acres out here on the prairie. We've got about a 5,000 acre tract of forest land near Waterton, right below the mountains. We hope to bring them back there, but a lot of our reserve has been cultivated. About 70% of our 350,000 acres has been converted to agricultural land. So we're trying to restore what's left of our native grass, and hopefully people that have that occupy some of the cultivated lands will start converting their land back to grass. But it's kind of a tough sell with our leadership, because they depend so much on agriculture. So yeah, it's just a challenge. But so I don't know if that really answers the question, but I guess that's and with the bison, What we proposed was an economic herd for commercial purposes and a cultural herd for obviously cultural purposes. So when the cultural herd expands, we're going to allow our religious or our ceremonial societies here for our annual big camp and through the ceremonies throughout the year. They'll be able to harvest some of those bison to use in their ceremonies. We're going to teach our students from kindergarten to high school. We're going to bring them out to where the bison are to teach them, you know, about the bison and what they really mean to us. So I guess I'll end it there, but I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. There's a lot of questions in here, and I'm just trying to see if I could give a chance for all the panelists to answer one of the questions. I did see, Norma, there's other questions for you that I think you were trying to answer in the chat as well. Thank you so much for that. There was one specifically that was asking you, Norma, about the work that you may be doing with like neighboring communities on caribou. I think you've seen that. Did you want to speak to a little bit to that? Oh, you're muted, Norma.
Again, I'm muted here. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see it? It's a book I'm putting in front of the camera. Okay, you can't see it, eh?
Yeah, it's kind of blended in with your background.
Okay, so it's called Defending the Arctic Refuge. And it's all about the Gwich'in and our story from the time the campaign was started. And it's by Finest Dunaway. And it encompasses all the knowledge that anyone wants to read about. It's there. And it's all about the porcupine caribou herds campaign. And yeah, it's available. And I just want to bring that to light. Yeah.
Beautiful. And maybe Allison or Christy can share that in the chat with everyone. Yep, I said they probably already did. I have another question here that's not really directed to anyone. So whoever feels like they can answer this question. Someone has asked, how do you see the potential of the integration of two-eyed seeing in nature-based solutions in Canada and the Sustainable Development Goals globally? So who wants to venture at answering that question?
Sorry, I missed that question. Can you say it again?
Yeah, I'll read it again. They're wondering about the potential for integrating two-eyed seeing in the concepts of both nature-based solutions and also in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals.
I think for hundreds of years now, Indigenous peoples have been trying to do this. We've been trying to educate and bring our knowledge to the international community at every level of discussions and every table of discussions. And the IUCN, the COPs, the huge international conference on climate change, we have been doing this for a long, long time. And we need to, I guess, be recognized for the knowledge that we do bring to these tables now, because it's absolutely imperative that Indigenous peoples are equally treated at every level in the area of conservation. And we need to be there. We have to be there. We have to be listened to. We have to be up there speaking and using our voice. Our youth need to be there. And our responsibility as Indigenous peoples are also to train our youth, teach our youth, and get them prepared for what's coming. And when we talk about nature, conservation and all that, it's our planet, one planet. That's all we have. And the resources that are available to us every day that we are so grateful for are the teachings that need to be passed on to youth of any diversity. So we Indigenous peoples need to be there at every level of the tables, right up to the international community, even right now in these discussions of what's going on. So when that recognition comes and when that is really there, we can make a lot of difference. It's happening step by step, slowly, but we do need to be there.
Thank you, Norma. Can anyone on the panel share any stories that would illustrate the strength of using both eyes? Like the two-eyed seeing concept that Albert has shared, maybe some new insights about specific species as an example in the work that you've done. Just, I guess, some really grounded examples of how the concept has advanced specific work on the ground.
I could try and give an example on salmon spawning conservation in central Yukon. I had the privilege of working with the First Nation of Nachinaikdan on identifying salmon spawning streams. And the traditional knowledge talked about areas that have never been seen with Chinook salmon in the last 40 years based on DFO observations. And so through the act of embracing the traditional knowledge in areas of streams and kind of the Western science knowledge of streams, they were able to provide this two-eyed seeing conservation map that showed the previous 7 generations and the future 7 generations and the concept of their conservation priority vision and how they wanted that acknowledged in the land use plan. And having one versus the other, but having them both together had this real rich story that they were able to use as part of their negotiations.
Thank you, Crystal. There appears to be a genuine interest in moving forward in a spirit of mutual respect with the opportunity to benefit from the practice of two-eyed seeing. As someone at the point of initiating a regional conservation initiative, like first steps of that journey that Albert tells us about, how do they best invite partners to come along on this journey for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous? What would you recommend, or what some advice would you guys give someone who's just initiating those conversations?
Hello, Lisa, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Elliot.
Yeah, Lisa, just going back to the previous question on some examples of, I guess, two-eyed seeing.
Yeah.
Here in southern Alberta, beaver have been disappearing over the last century. And I was reading a book, it's really interesting. It's sad, but it's really interesting. It's called Clearing the Plains. It's by James Dashuk from the University of Regina. But he just talks about how, the government was trying to clear the plains, I guess, of the Indigenous people to build the railroad. And as they were doing that, they fragmented the bison population. A lot of the beavers were killed. And the Hudson Bay Company, they wanted us to start trapping and selling them furs. That would be the Blackfoot people. But one of the main animals that they wanted to trap was the beaver. But the beaver is one of the most sacred animals to the Blackfoot people. It's a really powerful spirit. And so what we're doing now, we're working with our First Nations government here and some of the surrounding agencies. Parks Canada is a great partner now and really supporting this. But we're trying to restore beaver to come back because they disappeared. So we're making these mock beaver dams because we all know now that beavers with their dams, they created water filters. And so and because there was, probably thousands or millions of beaver, building all these dams and filtering all of this water made it so that our aquifers were recharged and our water was filtered, right? And so to us as the Blackfoot people, respecting beavers and not wanting to trap them for the Hudson Bay, that's, I guess, one way of looking at it now. I guess in the current context of conservation, while these beavers are they clean the water basically, right? And a lot of the people that don't like them, that the beavers will cut down some of the trees near the river or whatever, so they shoot them or they trap them or they kill them, right? So I don't know if that's a good example, but that's one way we're trying to, incorporate this concept of two-eyed seeing.
I just want to add to that a little story. In the photo there, you see lakes. We're people of lakes. We're thousands of lakes where we live in Vantatkuchin. We are people of the lakes. Those lakes are draining away due to climate change. And they're actually just draining out the big lakes. That lake right there is gone. They're draining away because of permafrost melt. And it's very sad, sorry. But my brother go out there and he's he guards our lands, our homelands all his life. And he's younger than me. And he went out there and he was wondering where all the beaver houses went to. They were always in the bottom of Tsitechik, the mountain, the last mountain. We're going into the flats. And there was lots of beavers around there all our lives that we grew up. And all of a sudden in the last few years, there was no beavers around there. There was no signs of them. So he went looking around and he saw that another lake, the Kakten-Deni, it's a place where an ancient elder had drowned. It's called the Kakten-Deni. And he went there and he looked around and he saw that the beavers had moved there to try and stop that big lake from draining. And and they built dams along the spot to try and stop the draining of that lake. And it's the profound connection that our animals and our people have to our place. And all the areas of conservation has always been for building economies, big game outfitting, for tourism, decimating our animals over the years and taking the prime breeders out through big game hunting and protectors of our homelands. These are protectors of herds of animals that are being taken out. And the collaring of animals now also is a concern to us because it's being watched on the internet. As an elder, it's a concern to me because when my grandfather and I raised me on this land here, caribou, thousands of them come by every day. The scientists start collaring them, and my grandfather, we found a dead caribou with a collar on it. And since then, I was just little and he never ever liked it. But it goes on today. And those collars are being followed by hunters. And we're going to have times where now there's going to be mass hunting. And we need to figure that out, that science is not doing us really good right now. We need to go back to the old ways of hunting and sharing and being real hunters. And a lot of what has been learned in the conservation community is by books handed down for thousands of years from settlers. And it's different than ours. Ours is place-based for thousands of years. And the interconnectivity from the muskrats, what they eat that feed the caribou, and the caribou feed them back and feeds us. That thousands of years of place-based knowledge is what we need to share with others in this country who are willing to learn. And my people have always welcomed scientists to our communities. And lots of them just came in, took and left. They've done that for a long time. It's different now. In the North, people are saying no more research about us without us. And we have to look at that in a very serious way. If you want to get a PhD in traditional knowledge, start with us when you're young. Be with us all the time. I got a PhD. I didn't get it from an institution. I gave it to myself by my grandpa. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Norma. Albert, I have a sense that there's something that you want to share at this point. Is there something that you would want to say?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate this question about the effectiveness of 2IC and how can it be instrumental in reaching it with, not just with the Western, but also with the modern ways of doing things. But first of all, 2IC is not just inherent to say me, my ways of thinking. It is if you are from this geographical area. Because to be able to share the wisdom, you have to be, first of all, intimately knowledgeable and connected to your geographical area. To recognize and to appreciate that everything is in a pattern. But where I'm hearing now is that, especially if we're going to be talking about invasive species or species that are not from here. The problem that came forth from that, whether it's an introduction or elimination of species, it was all done for the sake of socioeconomics, or mighty dollar. And what we hoped, and it's manifesting, that every action that we individually and hopefully collectively will make an effort or do is to transform those actions always to be in harmony with nature. As well, to spend much energy of ensuring that the actions will also be in harmony with the humankind, because they're the ones that have to do the work that's before us. So 2IC, and then I believe that's why these 2 I's were used, because each and every one of us have 2 I's. And those 2 I's, we have one lens in which we see everything from that lens of not just where we come from, but who we are, but why we are here, and the gifts that we have brought forth. And since from the beginning, we know that coexistence was inevitable, whether that was coexistence with the natural world or with the other humans. And it is our prerogative to seek and to use perspectives from others, so that it will not only enrich, but also will enhance our own perspectives, how we can become much more instrumental of fulfilling our inherent responsibility of maintaining harmony with nature. And of course now too, science has played a major role on that. But when I invoke my 2IC, not science, yes, I applaud science, brought forth a lot of wonderful, wonderful things. But basically, science was used more or less as an arm of destruction. And if we do some reflections like we have been doing, we can also see that this is a wonderful knowledge and energy, and with that knowledge, that energy could also be used to help us by mitigating and restoring some of the actions that we humans may create for the very source of life in which we all depend upon. So, you know, this is really, I really appreciate it, because that was the intent, that my two eyes are very effective in my geographical area, because I use the knowledge that not just what I have seen or observed, but what has been passed on to me from previous generations, and apply those wisdoms to give me a much more, so that I can become much more effective of not just fulfilling my inherent responsibility, not just for me personally, but for the benefit of all. So I thank everyone, each and every one here for sharing how that concept has helped them in looking at not their actions, but the actions of others as well, from another perspective, and ensuring that the wisdom that have been left to them by their ancestors and from the previous generations are also now are just as needed, because when species were introduced them days, it was always there to maintain and to enhance biodiversity. If some of the species have been eradicated, then the species will be introduced if they are in harmony with nature. But the reasoning has to be for Earth Mother. If the reasons are outside of that, then we know what happens, whether it's the zebra mussels or whether it's the rabbits in Australia or any other species that have been introduced for the wrong reason. And I think this is why I believe this concept of two-eye seeing has gained in momentum, because people are now beginning to seriously reflect and see not only where we came from, but how we got here and the devastation that we have created because we have allowed ourselves to be disconnected from nature. Thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful words, Albert. And I just want to say on behalf of the panel for thanking you for being one of the leading voices and sharers of that concept and advancing the concepts of two-eyed seeing, along with all the wonderful work that these people and on our panel. Want to thank you, Norma, Gary, Elliot, Crystal, for the great work that you are doing in advancing Indigenous-led conservation and uplifting our Indigenous communities and our people. Thank you. And Albert, I hope you enjoyed hearing of all the great work that's been done. I know you're always calling on us. It's not enough to talk about this. Action's important, and I think these good people today demonstrate that there's definitely a lot of action happening on the ground that we can all be proud of. And with that, I guess thank you all too for joining us today and engaging in this rich dialogue, and thank you for your wonderful and insightful questions. And we're hoping to do more of these virtual campfire series. And if you still want to engage and talk to different people across this nation on the work they're doing, that there's ways to do that through the CRP. And then Allison had mentioned some good things coming up, including our website and different formats for people to engage and share. And as we say, ensure that we rise together with this and help advance all this important work, because like you guys all said, we've done a lot, but there's still so much more to do. So thank you, everyone. And with that, Albert, if you would honor us with a closing, we'll finish up for the day.
Puccino. I'm Carmelo, Volaria. Volaria, si tante via si dia mi ma vidare. Volaria, Carmelo, si tante di go, cosa anche se non muoio. Cosa andando, lì ne vede che anche che namoro. Era mole melu ya agola di melu si da tante si che non muoio, quello di codi, a quanta codi. Era mole nega si ya buona muoia. Si ho gina muoia. Con la mano lo guanta, non da lo guasti. Si vuole guardare snel. A posito se vuole vola besito. A era mole nega io. Si vuole man fanabe, a buona muoia. Ina muoia. Il quenine. Con la mano. En mi na go minarse, ina kaya. Injudesen. Na poi lo guan fiti podam caro, sia wasido. Thank you very much.
Lalan. Thank you, everyone.